This is not the story you think you know. You know the ruby slippers, the ones that sparkled on the feet of Judy Garland, the ones that clicked together and whispered, "There's no place like home." But those slippers were a lie, a beautiful cinematic technicolor lie. In the original story, the one written in 1900, Dorothy's magical shoes were not ruby, they were silver. And that single, simple change, a change made by a Hollywood studio to show off its new color technology, erased the entire point of the story. It hid a secret meaning, a political allegory so powerful, so controversial, that it has been debated for over half a century. This is not a story about a girl in a magical land. This is a story about America at the turn of the 20th century. A nation in crisis. A nation torn apart by a bitter debate over money, power, and its own soul. A battle between the gold standard and free silver, between the farmers of the West and the bankers of the East, between the common man and the powerful elite. This is the story of a failed chicken farmer, a failed axle grease salesman, a failed shopkeeper, a failed newspaper editor, who, at the age of 44, on the brink of financial ruin, wrote a children's book that was secretly a political parable for his time. We all know the story. A girl from Kansas, a scarecrow who wants a brain, a Tin Woodman who wants a heart, and a cowardly lion who wants courage. A journey down a yellow brick road to a magical city to ask a wizard for help. But what if I told you that the scarecrow was the American farmer, that the Tin Woodman was the industrial worker, that the cowardly lion was a famous politician, that the wizard was the President of the United States, and that the entire story was a brilliant, coded attack on the American political system? This is the story of the story. The story of how a simple American fairy tale became a battleground for historians, economists, and political theorists. A story that asks a fundamental question: was The Wonderful Wizard of Oz a charming children's book? Or was it one of the most sophisticated pieces of political satire ever written? The answer is hidden in the silver shoes. The man who created the most beloved American fairy tale was, by almost any measure, a spectacular failure. Lyman Frank Baum was a dreamer, a schemer, a man with a boundless imagination and a terrible head for business. He was a professional poultry fancier whose prize-winning chickens never turned a profit. He was an actor and playwright whose traveling theater company went bankrupt. He was an axle grease salesman. He was a shopkeeper whose store, filled with whimsical toys and luxury goods, was a financial disaster. In 1888, seeking a fresh start, Baum moved his growing family from New York to the dusty, wind-swept plains of Aberdeen, South Dakota. "In your country," he wrote to his brother-in-law, "there is an opportunity to be somebody." He opened a store called Baum's Bazaar. It failed. He started a newspaper, the Aberdeen Saturday Pioneer. It also failed. He was a man haunted by debt, by drought, by the harsh realities of a frontier that promised everything and delivered little. Baum's time in the West was a crucible. He witnessed firsthand the struggles of the American farmer, the crushing power of the banks, the broken promises of the American dream. He saw the blank slate of the prairie for what it was, a land already scarred by conflict, a land taken from the Sioux, a land that was now taking everything from him. By 1891, defeated and broke, Baum moved his family again, this time to the booming, chaotic city of Chicago. He took a job as a reporter, then as a traveling salesman for a crockery company. He was a man in his late 30s, with a wife and 4 sons, and a string of failures that stretched from New York to South Dakota. He was, by all accounts, a nobody. But in 1893, Baum saw something that would change his life. The Chicago World's Fair, the White City. It was a grand illusion, a fantasy world built in the heart of a modern city. Baum was captivated. He saw the power of a created world, a world of spectacle and wonder that could transport people from their ordinary lives. He saw the future, and he saw a way to finally turn his failures into a success. And so, at the age of 44, after a lifetime of false starts and broken dreams, Frank Baum sat down and wrote a story for his children. A story about a girl from Kansas, a place he knew well. A story about a magical city inspired by the White City of Chicago. A story that took all of his failures, all of his struggles, all of his observations of American life, and transformed them with what one historian called rare artistic alchemy into something new. He called it The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, and with it, the man who had failed at everything finally created something that would last forever. The world that Baum created was unlike any fairy tale that had come before. It was not a world of European castles and ancient curses. It was a uniquely American world. A world of prairies and cornfields, of scarecrows and tin men. A world that was both deeply familiar and utterly strange. But in 1964, a high school history teacher named Henry Littlefield published an article that would change the way we see Oz forever. He argued that The Wonderful Wizard of Oz was not just a children's story. It was a political allegory, a brilliant coded satire of the populist movement of the 1890s. According to Littlefield, every character, every location, every event in Oz corresponds to a real-world figure or idea from the turbulent politics of the 1890s. It is a hidden language, a secret code that once you see it, you can't unsee. Dorothy, the innocent girl from Kansas, is the American people swept up in a storm of political change. The Scarecrow, who believes he has no brain, is the American farmer constantly belittled by the Eastern elites, but actually full of common sense and wisdom. The Tin Woodman, rusted and frozen, is the industrial worker, dehumanized by the factory system, his heart literally taken from him. The Cowardly Lion, with his loud roar and his lack of courage, is William Jennings Bryan, the great orator of the populist movement, the man who gave the famous Cross of Gold speech, but who ultimately failed to win the presidency. And the road they travel on, the famous yellow brick road? That is the gold standard, the monetary policy that the populists believed was destroying the country. It is a road that seems to promise a solution, but it is a hard, unforgiving path that ultimately leads to a city of illusion. The Emerald City, the destination of their quest, is Washington, D.C., a city that appears to be made of emeralds, but is actually just normal buildings viewed through green-tinted glasses. A city of money, of power, of deception. And the ruler of this city, the great and powerful Oz, he is the President of the United States, a man who appears to be a giant head, or a beautiful lady, or a terrible beast, but is in reality just a common man from Omaha, a humbug, a fraud, pulling levers behind a curtain. The witches, too, have their real-world counterparts. The Wicked Witch of the East, who enslaves the Munchkins, represents the Eastern financial interests, the bankers and industrialists who control the economy. The Wicked Witch of the West, who rules over the parched, yellow landscape of Winky Country, is the personification of the droughts and hardships that plague the American West. And the key to it all, the secret weapon that can defeat the witches and solve everyone's problems, the silver shoes. Not ruby, silver, the symbol of the populist movement's great cause, the free coinage of silver. The belief that adding silver to the money supply would create inflation, help the indebted farmers, and break the power of the gold standard. It is a perfect, elegant, and deeply cynical allegory. A story that says the common people have the power to solve their own problems, but they are led on a wild goose chase by a fraudulent leader who tells them to follow a path that benefits only the powerful. A story that says the solution is right there, on their own feet, but they are too naive to see it. But is it true? Did L. Frank Baum, the failed businessman and children's author, really create this complex political masterpiece? Or is it just a theory, a clever interpretation read into a simple story? The debate has raged for decades. And the answer may be lost to history. The debate over the political meaning of Oz has consumed historians for over half a century. On one side, there are those who believe that Littlefield's interpretation is a work of genius, a key that unlocks the hidden meaning of the text. They point to the overwhelming number of parallels, the precision of the symbolism, the fact that Baum was a politically active man who lived through the very events the story supposedly describes. On the other side, there are those who argue that Littlefield was reading too much into a simple children's story. They point out that Baum himself never confirmed the allegory. They argue that any sufficiently complex story can be interpreted in multiple ways, and that the political reading of Oz says more about the interpreter than the author. The truth, as with most things in history, is probably somewhere in between. Baum was not a political theorist. He was a storyteller. But he was a storyteller who had lived through the Panic of 1893, who had watched his neighbors lose their farms, who had seen the promises of the American frontier turn to dust. He was a man who had experienced the gold standard not as an abstract economic concept, but as a crushing personal reality. Whether he sat down and deliberately coded a political message into his story, or whether the politics of his time simply seeped into his imagination, the result is the same. The parallels are there, the symbolism works, and the story, read through the lens of the 1890s, takes on a depth and a power that goes far beyond a simple children's tale. Consider the name Oz itself. Some scholars have pointed out that Oz is the abbreviation for ounce, the standard unit of measurement for gold and silver. Was this a deliberate choice by Baum or a coincidence? We may never know. But the fact that the question can even be asked tells you something about the richness of the world he created. And consider the ending. In the book, Dorothy defeats the Wicked Witch of the West by throwing a bucket of water on her. Water, the one thing that the parched, drought-stricken farmers of the West needed more than anything. The one thing that could have saved Baum's own store in Aberdeen. The simplest, most elemental force in nature, used to destroy the greatest evil in the land. It is either a brilliant piece of political symbolism or a happy accident. Either way, it is unforgettable. Whether or not L. Frank Baum intended his story as a political allegory, its success was undeniable. The Wonderful Wizard of Oz was a sensation. It became America's first great homegrown fairy tale. Baum would go on to write 13 more Oz books, creating a vast and detailed fantasy world that would captivate generations of readers. But in 1939, the story of Oz was transformed. MGM Studios, in a bid to compete with the success of Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, decided to turn Baum's book into a lavish, big-budget musical. And in the process, they made one small, seemingly insignificant change that would have a profound impact on the story's meaning. The filmmakers, wanting to take full advantage of the new dazzling technology of Technicolor, decided that silver shoes were too dull. They needed something that would pop on screen. And so, they changed them to ruby. And with that one simple, aesthetic choice, the entire political allegory, whether intended or not, was erased. The ruby slippers are beautiful. They are iconic. They are one of the most famous props in movie history. But they are meaningless. They have no connection to the political and economic debates of the 1890s. They are just a pair of magic shoes. The secret code was broken. The hidden language was lost. The 1939 film is a masterpiece of Hollywood fantasy. It is a cultural touchstone, a beloved classic that has been seen by billions of people. For most of the world, the MGM film is The Wizard of Oz. It has completely overshadowed the original book. And in doing so, it has transformed the story from a sharp, political satire into a heartwarming tale about the importance of home. There's no place like home. It is the film's great enduring message. A message that is comforting, universal, and completely absent from the original book. Baum's Dorothy is a brave, resourceful adventurer who is happy to be home in the end, but she is not defined by her desire to get there. The film's Dorothy is a lost, frightened child whose only goal is to return to the familiar world of Kansas. The legacy of Oz is a strange and complicated one. It is a story that exists in two parallel universes. The world of the book with its silver shoes and its hidden political message, and the world of the film with its ruby slippers and its message of home and family. And in recent years, the story has been transformed yet again. In 1995, Gregory Maguire published the novel Wicked, The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West, a revisionist take on the Oz story told from the perspective of the villain. The book and the massively successful Broadway musical it inspired turned the story on its head once again. It transformed the Wicked Witch from a one-dimensional monster into a tragic, misunderstood hero. It gave her a name, a backstory, a motivation. It made her human. And in doing so, it brought the story full circle. It returned the political and social commentary to Oz. Wicked is a story about propaganda, about animal rights, about the nature of good and evil. It is a story that is deeply, profoundly political. It is, in its own way, a return to the spirit of the original book. A return to the idea that a fairy tale can be more than just a fairy tale. So, what is the true story of Oz? Is it a political allegory about the gold standard? Is it a heartwarming tale about the importance of home? Is it a tragic story about a misunderstood witch? The answer is that it is all of these things, and that is the source of its enduring power. The Wizard of Oz is not a static, unchanging myth. It is a living, breathing story that has been reinterpreted and reimagined by each generation. It is a mirror that reflects the anxieties, the hopes, and the political realities of the time in which it is told. It is the great American fairy tale, not because it is a single, perfect story, but because it is a story that we can all claim as our own. Frank Baum set out to create a new kind of fairy tale. A fairy tale for American children. A fairy tale with no kings, no castles, no ancient curses. A fairy tale that was grounded in the familiar landscape of the American heartland. He succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. He created a world that has become a part of our collective consciousness, a story that has been passed down from generation to generation, a myth that is as central to American identity as the story of the Revolution or the Civil War. And whether he intended it or not, he also created a story that was deeply, profoundly political. A story that reminds us that the line between fantasy and reality is never as clear as we think. That the stories we tell our children are never just stories. And that sometimes the most powerful political statements are hidden in the most unlikely of places. The journey to Oz is a journey into the heart of America. A journey down a yellow brick road that is paved with both promise and peril. A journey that reminds us that we all have a choice. We can follow the path that is laid out for us, or we can click our heels together and find our own way home. Join us next time as we leave the fairy tale land of Oz and travel to the dark, Gothic world of a Transylvanian count. We will explore the story of the most famous vampire in history, Dracula. Thank you for joining us on the Impossible Atlas. If you believe that a single idea can change the world, then you have found your home. Subscribe to the channel and continue to explore the worlds that never were.